Hey guys, welcome back to Team 6K. This is Undead, and today we're going to be talking about Orcusts. Before we get into the video though, be sure to go ahead and check out our last video if you're interested in learning how to play Blue Eyes optimally in 2023. So there was a poll, Orcust won by a landslide. I'm going to make videos on those other two decks eventually, but I'm going to have to put them in another poll because they didn't get anywhere near close to the amount of votes that Orcusts got. So if you want to be a part of that next poll, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to make sure you get notified when it happens. So, the Orcust archetype just got a bunch of support in Duel Links, and this video is going to be a little bit different because I'm going to have to describe two different versions of the deck based on which limited one card you choose to play, that being either Nightmare Mermaid or Orchestrated Babel. Both versions are definitely competitive.
Which would you prefer?
Both? Both is good.
A lot of people have been trying to put the Mermaid Orcust engine into any deck that put new monsters on the field and discard a card with. You might as well just be playing pure Orcust instead of just putting a bunch of bricks in your deck hoping you don't have them, especially when the deck that you're putting it in doesn't really synergize with it. In the TCG they could get away with it because they have 40 cards, they're not as likely to draw those bricks, but in Duel Links deck building it's going to be a lot tighter. You could say you could increase your deck size to 30, but at that point you're ruining the consistency of the deck that you're trying to put the Orcust engine into in the first place, when you could just be playing that deck that you're putting it into, or just playing Orcust generally with 20 cards. Before I get into the differences between the decks, I'm gonna have to go over the cards themselves, and then to showcase why they're so different, I'm gonna show combo tutorials for each version of the deck and overall game plan tutorials. First thing we have to understand in Orcusts, regardless of what deck you're playing, is the full grave effect of the main deck effect monsters. The first one is Orcust Harp Horror. It lets you banish itself from the graveyard to special summon any Orcust monster from your deck except for another copy of itself, and you cannot special summon monsters for the rest of this turn except dark monsters, and that restriction that locks you into dark monsters for the rest of the turn applies to all of the Orcust. So if your deck for some reason special summons anything other than darks, you're going to have to do everything before you use any grave effect of an Orcust. So Harp Horror, the one that summons from deck. Symbol Skeleton is the same, except instead of summoning from the deck, it summons from the graveyard. Brass Bombard is the same, except it special summons one from the hand. This is the least useful one. Then the fourth Orcust, arguably the most important one, is Orcust Nightmare. This one cannot be destroyed by battle with a link monster, but the main effect is that you can banish it from your graveyard, then target any monster on the field, so there has to be a monster on the field for you to activate this in the first place, and you cannot special summon monsters except dark monster for the rest of the turn, just like the other Orcust. Also, you send a dark machine monster from your deck to the graveyard, except for another copy of itself, and if you do, the targeted monster gains attack equal to the level of the monster sent to the graveyard times 100 until the end of the turn. So these guys all kind of lead to each other. If you can get a Nightmare in the grave, you could banish it to send a Harp Horror to the grave, but you can then banish that to summon one of your other Orcusts from the deck, link them off, and then you can banish them to summon something from the graveyard for Skeleton and from the hand for Bombard. But using the Orcust, what exactly are we trying to get into? Our opening plays are going to be a little bit different depending on the version of the deck we're playing. However, we're always going to be summoning Galatea, the Orcust Automaton, and Dingirsu, the Orcust of the Evening Star. Galatea is a Link 2 that requires 2 effect monsters, including at least one Orcust monster. You can target one of your banished machine-type monsters, which all of the Orcusts are, you shuffle it back into the deck, then you set an Orcust spell or trap directly from your deck. So of course, regardless of what version you're playing, you are going to be playing the Orchestrated Return, which is a normal spell that sends an Orcust or World Legacy monster from hand or field to the grave to draw 2 cards. But then the other searchable back row you play in the deck is dependent on which version of the deck you're playing. If you're playing the Babel version, Orchestrated Babel happens to be limited to 1, so we can't play it in the same deck as Nightmare Mermaid, so you have to pick one. So in the version that we play Babel, of course, we play Babel. It's a field spell that allows you to activate the effects of Orcust monsters in your graveyard and Orcust Link monsters on your field as quick effects. So all of those grave effects banishing themselves to do something from the grave, you can do that on your opponent's turn or in response to things. In your Galatea, you can reshuffle things from your banish pile to set back row from your deck on your opponent's turn again. And of course, you'd mainly do that to recycle your resources, but the fact that it's a quick effect is pretty cool. The main reason you'd want to go for the Babel is that if you have an Orcust symbol skeleton in your grave, which banishes itself to special summon from the graveyard, you could do that on the opponent's turn to special summon a Dingirsu, and we'll find out why that's so relevant soon. It's going to be relevant for the exact same reason that the orchestrated release is going to be relevant in the Nightmare Mermaid version of the deck. In the Nightmare Mermaid version of the deck, obviously, since we are playing Mermaid, we can't play Babel, so we're not going to be able to use Brass Bombard as a quick effect on our opponent's turn. However, instead of searching the Babel, we can search the Orchestrated Release, which is a trap that says you can tribute 2 machine monsters, then target 1 monster in your graveyard and special summon it. And if your opponent controls a link monster, you can target 2 monsters instead. So we could tribute 2 of our monsters, then resummon the Dingirsu. I've mentioned Dingirsu twice without even saying what his effect is. Well, let's get into what this elusive Xyz does. It's a rank 8, it usually requires 2 level 8 monsters, and you can only special summon him once per turn. That's important. You can also Xyz summon this card by using an Orcust link monster you control as material. That doesn't mean that you can treat one of his materials as a link monster. It doesn't mean like 1 level 8 and 1 link monster. No. 1 link monster is the material for this card. You summon 1 Orcust link monster, then just slap this guy on top of him. And then if a card you control would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can detach 1 material from this card instead. And this effect is not a once per turn. But that's not relevant, is it really? Since we're only going to have the link monster as material, we're only going to have the link monster to detach. Well, when it's special summoned, you can activate one of these effects. The first is you can send a card your opponent controls to the graveyard, non-target, or you can attach one of your banished machine type monsters to this card as material. We're going to be banishing machines, which means we're going to be equipping banished machines to Dingirsu, which means we're going to have 2 Xyz materials on Dingirsu, which means if they want to destroy any of our cards, not just Orcust cards, any of our cards at all, they want to destroy it by any means, battle or card effect, we just attach once, even if they're trying to destroy multiple cards. And then they try to destroy us again. Nope, Dingirsu says no. We detach again, and we're protected yet again. So being able to attach one of your banished Xyz to it as material, if you're going first with this, is pretty awesome. But you know, let's go back a second. You look a little bit confused. You look like I kind of forgot that he just, oh, you know, he just non-target sends a card to the graveyard. No big deal. No. He non-target sends any card to the graveyard on summon. Not on Xyz summon. Not on summon from grave like my Akashi's. Just on summon. Which means we got a link monster on the field, boom, your opponent's card's gone. You got a symbol skeleton in the grave and the Babel on the field, boom, your card's gone. We got a trap on the field and 2 monsters on field. We can use release, tribute our 2 monsters, resummon Dingirsu, boom, your card's gone. And what could you do about it? Respond? It doesn't matter, a card's still getting sent, because we don't have to choose what card we send until the chain resolves. And the fact that it doesn't destroy, oh no man, the opponent's got the Dark Magicians on the field. I don't care. I'm not destroying you. Get out of here. Don't float. The opponent can't be targeted by card effects. I don't care. I don't target. Get out of here. The opponent can't be targeted by card effects and can't be destroyed. I don't give a damn. Get out of here. So regardless of which version of Orcust you're playing, Dingirsu is the house that you're trying to build. If the opponent tries to break it, good luck. It can protect you and your entire field twice, and then remove your opponent's field. There's a bunch of other cards in this deck that you can see on your screen right now. I'm not going to explain them until after I explain the differences between the deck more in depth. I'm going to show you the game plan for each version of the deck, then I'm going to explain the other deck building choices for each version of the deck. You can see which one you'd prefer to play and then see what you might want to do to build that version optimally. So I'm going to explain the Nightmare Mermaid version of the deck first. So what you want in your hand is pretty much no Orcust Nightmares. That is the first thing you want in your hand. The reason that you would play 2 copies of Orcust Nightmare in this version is because in this version, if you have one in your hand but you don't have one in the deck, then the combo is kind of going to be screwed up. Because the reason we use Nightmare Mermaid is that on Link Summon, basically discard a card on Link Summon to special summon Orcust Nightmare from the deck. So we want to have one in the deck regardless. That's why we play 2, just in case we just so happen to draw one. If we happen to draw one of the other Orcust, it is fine, we can discard them. But what you're going to want in your hand is some kind of way to get 2 monsters on the field, because Nightmare Mermaid requires a Nightmare monster except for itself. That includes Nightmare Cerberus and Nightmare Phoenix. Of course, these are Link 2 monsters, meaning that we need 2 monsters on the field to summon them. So we're going to look for cards that can basically, just by themselves, get 2 monsters on the field. Phantom Skyblaster is a great one, because I'm not going to read it, it's a little bit complicated the way it works. Basically, you normal summon it and you summon one token. Doesn't matter what type of token it is, you're just going to use both of them to either go into Nightmare Cerberus or Nightmare Phoenix. If you want to know what these guys do, they basically on link summon, discard a card, target it to destroy a back row if you're Phoenix, or target a special summoned monster in the main monster zone and destroy it if you're Cerberus. But what if the opponent doesn't have a card? It's fine, you still summon these. You don't actually have to activate their effect, you just summon it, use it as material for Mermaid, and special summon the Orcust Nightmare. You could have a Phantom Sky Blaster, summon a token, make a link 2, or you could summon Scrap Recycler, which on normal or special summon sends a machine type monster from your deck to the grave. In this case, it could be Jet Synchron, which while it's in the grave lets you discard a card to special summon it. The reason you might like to play Jet Synchron is if you happen to have one of your Orcust in your hand, the Jet Synchron can discard it for you so you can get that beneficial grave effect. Instead of the Scrap Recycler in this version, you could play Neo Space Connector, which on normal summon will special summon a Neo Spacian from the deck. And you're going to special summon Aqua Dolphin, which technically you can discard a card to look at your opponent's hand, and if they have a monster with attack less than the monsters you control, then you can discard that card from their hand. So you could look at their hand, discard a DD Crow from their hand. The reason I prefer to have Scrap Recycler instead of that is if the opponent happens to be playing rockets and they use their rocket that rips a card out of my extra deck, that being a Nightmare Mermaid probably, then I'm not going to be able to do the Nightmare combo. And Scrap Recycler isn't just a way to get into Mermaid, it's also a way to just get into the combo standardly, because on normal summon, send any machine to the grave. Jet Synchron's not the only machine in the deck, we also have every Orcust, including Orcust Nightmare, which we are trying to get into the grave. In this particular situation, I do have the Scrap Recycler, but I'm going to pretend that it's just like something else. I'm going to normal summon the Scrap Recycler, activate its effect. Normally, I would send an Orcust Nightmare, get my combo started regardless. But because I'm trying to teach you the general combo, I'm going to use the function of Scrap Recycler that is basically doing the exact same thing as the Phantom Sky Blaster. So I'm going to send that Jet Synchron, use its effect, discard a card. Now we have 2 monsters on the field. Completely fine. Now we can go into a Nightmare, and the Nightmare that we go into is going to depend on what we think is going to be useful on the follow-up, because we might need to go into a Nightmare on the follow-up turn. So you look at the opponent's character, you consider what kind of deck they're playing, you consider what you might like to destroy before you go in for your plays with the Nightmares, and then whichever one you don't want to use on your follow-up play, or you want to use less on your follow-up play, that's the one you use for your opening play. So that's usually going to be Nightmare Cerberus, because back row is going to be more relevant to pop, so we're going to go into that. Almost always summoning into this extra monster zone here, and that'll be explained in a second. But then we're going to use that Nightmare to go into Nightmare Mermaid, which on link summon will discard any card to special summon the Orcust Nightmare from the deck. And of course, any deck that can put 2 monsters on the field, you can do this combo. But don't just go around with any deck putting 2 monsters on the field, discarding a card and doing this combo. It's really not that good of an idea in the majority of decks. Just play it in pure Orcust for the majority of the time, unless you find a deck that really synergizes with it. So I'm going to use these 2 monsters to go into Galatea, the Orcust Automaton. And the main reason we're going into this is twofold. Its on-field effect is amazing. It's also a Orcust link monster, so it helps us go into our next play, and also it gets the Orcust Nightmare into the graveyard, so we can use the Orcust Nightmare's grave effect right away. Gets our play started, targets one of our monsters or the opponent's monster technically if they have any, to make them gain attack equal to the Orcust that we sent to the grave. We're going to send Harp Horror. If we already have Harp Horror, it's okay. We can send a Brass Bombard to special summon the Harp Horror from hand, link it off potentially. Then we can use Orcust Harp Horror in the grave to special summon the Orcust symbol skeleton. Now we have a couple of banished Orcust monsters. Before we keep going, we want to make sure that we've banished 2 Orcusts. So what we're going to do next with the Galatea, reshuffle the Orcust Harp Horror from our banish back into the main deck. That'll allow us to set a back row from our deck. So in this version of the deck, that'll be Orchestrated Return or Orchestrated Release, and we're going to get Release. The reason that we get Return is maybe we already have Release in our hand. Now that we have the link monster on the field, we're going to turn it into Dingirsu Orcust of the Evening Star. I like to summon it in the main monster zone. It's technically not that deep because we're going to tribute it with the trap card anyway on the opponent's turn, but on summon, if you're going first, what you're going to do is use that second effect to attach one of your banished machine type monsters to this card as a material. That's why it's important to have 2 of your machines machines banished. So we're going to use that, attach one of our other banished machines. Now we have 2 materials to detach. If the opponent wants to destroy one of our cards, we can detach a material from Dingirsu to prevent that destruction. And this doesn't go on the chain, it's a replacement effect, so you don't respond to their destruction, but when it resolves, then you detach a material. And then you can do it again. Guess what? We could detach again. We're protected twice. And then we basically play on the opponent's turn. The opponent really didn't do anything here, but we're going to show what we do regardless. We're going to use Orchestrated Release, which will allow us to tribute 2 machines to resummon a monster from grave. Any monster at all, including our non-archetypal monsters. And of course, we're going to resummon Dingirsu. The trap, the fact that it doesn't target means that we can resummon whatever we tributed as well. So we're going to resummon Dingirsu, and its on-summon effect will allow us to send a card our opponent controls to the grave. If we don't feel the need to send a card our opponent controls to the grave, we could also just attach a banished machine to it as material. For the sake of learning, I'm just going to remove the opponent's monster. And then on our follow-up turn, we're not dead either. We actually have our grave effects here. We got the Nightmare back in graveyard because we made sure to attach it to the Dingirsu on our last turn, so now it's in the graveyard again. We get to basically start the play over again. So we can use that Nightmare, make our Ding gain attack, send the Harp Horror again. And the fact that we also summoned the Symbol Skeleton last turn with the Harp Horror means that the Symbol Skeleton, after tributing it with the trap, is going to be in that graveyard from the last turn, so we can use that to resummon one of our Orcusts, for example the Galatea. And, you know, we can use the effect of Galatea again, reshuffle, to set a back row from the deck. However, if you don't have any Orcust back row in the deck, it will still activate to shuffle something into the deck regardless. You don't have to add a back row. And then from here, you have a link. You know, you could link these 2 cards off if you wanted. If you didn't want to use the Symbol Skeleton to revive the Galatea, you could have gotten another monster on the field by another means, for example by the effect of Harp Horror, then linked that and the Dingirsu off into another copy of Galatea from the extra deck, then use the effect of Symbol Skeleton to revive that Dingirsu to remove another card. But you know, since things happen to be the way they are, I could resummon the Galatea very simply, without having to do anything complicated. Just resummon that Galatea, and because it is a link, I can turn it into my second copy of Ding. Technically, I could remove another of the opponent's cards if they had one. They don't in this scenario, so I'm just gonna reattach a card. And you know, that's already lethal on board. Technically, it was already lethal on board when I had the link monster. But if it wasn't yet, then the Ding could remove something, and it's gonna be very difficult to stop us too, because we're gonna be indestructible for the majority of our game plan. I really like that Mermaid version of the deck. It is very consistent, to be sure. However, the normal summon is a little bit flimsier. In this version, the normal summon's a little bit less flimsy, and the ban list potential, more importantly, is quite a lot less flimsy. That Mermaid play is so splashable that Konami might just up and ban it within a couple weeks, which means that Orcust will have to default to playing a much more pure version. Thankfully though, the much more pure version is a little bit more forgiving when it comes to the opponent's interruptions. We play the same starter of Scrap Recycler, which of course can send the Nightmare or any of the other Orcusts we happen to need. And we also play 3 copies of Orchestrated Return and more of the Orcusts, so that we have a higher likelihood of being able to discard them with the effect of Orchestrated Return itself. Great thing about Orchestrated Return is that it gets an Orcust from hand into the graveyard and draws 2 cards. It could draw 1 card and I might still play it, but the fact that it draws 2 cards means that we're that much more likely to draw into our starter or draw into our staple options. But here we have the starter, and it's not going to be that difficult to get the starter because we either want to have the starter or the Orchestrated Return. Either way, we're going to be able to get 2 monsters on the field. We already know how Scrap Recycler gets 2 monsters on the field, but Orchestrated Return, let's say you discard a Nightmare. Nightmare banishes itself to send a Harp Horror. Harp Horror banishes itself to summon another Orcust from the deck. Then you can normal summon whatever you happen to have in your hand. Or you discard a Harp Horror, same thing. Discard a Brass Bombard. Bombard will banish itself to summon 1 from hand, then you can normal summon. Regardless, the archetype itself has no issues getting 2 monsters on the field. But here we have the Scrap Recycler, just gonna normal summon that, use its effect right off the bat. Send a copy of Orcust Nightmare. Nightmare can banish itself. Of course, we're still going to want to get 2 banished Orcusts within our combo, so that's why we send the Nightmare first. Gonna target the Scrap Recycler, send a Harp Horror. Harp Horror will banish itself, special summoning the Orcust Symbol Skeleton. Then we can link these 2 off into Galatea in this extra monster zone too if possible, and we can use this effect reshuffle a card from my banish to set a Orchestrated Babel from the deck. We already have Orchestrated Babel in the hand. If we didn't have it in the hand, then of course we would have set it from the deck. But regardless, we can activate that Orchestrated Babel, and using our Galatea as material, we can go into Dingirsu. And then on summon, since we are going first, we can attach that Nightmare to it as Xyz material, and our field will be indestructible twice. But then why would we go for the Babel? Well, it's because it turns our Orcust symbol skeleton into a quick effect. If the Dingirsu sent to our graveyard by the opponent, resummon it using the symbol skeleton to remove one of their cards. However, if we just so happen to have another way to get another monster on the field, or we have the Orchestrated Return, which can send an Orcust from hand or field to the grave to draw 2 cards, then it would be even better, because we can send the Dingirsu to the grave, draw a couple cards, right? And then, without even needing the opponent to get rid of our Dingirsu, we can use that symbol skeleton's grave effect whenever we like. I'm just going to send the symbol skeleton here. What's kind of cool is, you know, if I have a Harper that I've already used and a symbol skeleton that I haven't used yet, then technically I can keep playing. I can use my symbol skeleton to revive the Harp Horror, use both of my monsters to go into a Galatea, and the Galatea will have the quick effect to return a banished machine to my deck on my opponent's turn, because the Babel makes its ignition effect a quick effect. So end my turn, I could activate the Galatea, put back the symbol skeleton, then the Nightmare that's already in my grave, I can use that effect right away, make one of my monsters gain attack, doesn't matter, then send the copy of symbol skeleton that I just returned to the deck, then I can use the symbol skeleton as if it never left my graveyard in the first place because of that Babel. So there's that little play that you can do potentially. And technically, I said that if you had a Harp Horror you already used, because, you know, if I had the Harp Horror, then I could have special summoned from the deck, gone into the link 2 without needing to go through all of those links, and then I would still have the symbol skeleton in the graveyard. But technically speaking, if you have anything to send with an Orchestrated Return, you can do that whole play. So of course, going to use that symbol skeleton, revive our own Dingirsu here. When you revive Dingirsu, by the way, you maybe do it to the zone that Galatea points to, so Galatea will be indestructible by battle. It can be nice to be indestructible by battle, even if that isn't the most, you know, useful thing in the world. If you can do it, you might as well, right? So gonna send a card our opponent controls to the graveyard, and you know, if I have a Harp Horror in grave, might as well use it, right? So we got no Orcust left in grave. However, it's not going to be that difficult to get them in grave anyway. The Galatea, we can activate it again, reshuffle something into our deck that we want to use again. Of course, skeleton is the best one to reuse, so I'm going to shuffle back the skeleton. Here, what I could do is I could use my Nightmare and one of my other monsters to go into my extra deck. You know, maybe a Unicorn, maybe a Longirsu, maybe another Galatea. I could even use my Orchestrated Return to get rid of my Orcust Nightmare. There's a lot of different ways to get my Dingirsu back into the grave to resummon, and my Nightmare back into the grave so I can send the symbol so I can resummon it. For the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to go into another copy of Galatea. Of course, I could just go into my second copy of Dingirsu if I wanted, but maybe I'd prefer to have that Dingirsu in there for the long game. The options in this deck are absolutely amazing. It lets you do the things you want to do for the given situation. It lets you play through things better than the other version. I'm gonna send that symbol skeleton, activate the symbol skeleton's grave effect, resummon the Dingirsu, send the opponent's last card to the grave, and you know, as you can see, the deck is a lot more explosive than the other version, but the other version gets to use Nightmare Mermaid. You can definitely pick whichever version you prefer based on the merits of each deck that you find are going to be more useful for you. Me personally, I like the Babel version more. However, you're equally valid if you go for the Mermaid version, at least until the Mermaid version is banned. Of course, those game plan combo guides for each version of the deck are probably going to be decent for familiarizing yourself with the effects of these guys, but you know, even though I explained them before, maybe go over them again. Orcust Nightmare banishes itself to send an Orcust to grave. Harp Horror banishes itself to summon an Orcust from deck. Symbol Skeleton banishes itself to summon an Orcust from grave, and Bombard banishes itself to summon an Orcust from hand. And of course, you're going to use the Bombard if you have one of your key Orcusts in hand that you want to summon and you can't send it to the grave with a Nightmare. And of course, we have the 1-card combo starters to help us go into the Mermaid, the Jet Synchron to also help us to get our Orcust in the grave, and also help us to get a second monster on the field for a Nightmare Mermaid if that's what we want to go for. And of course, you could play the Neospace Connector with the Neospatian Aqua Dolphin if that's what you prefer instead of the Scrap Recycler. I haven't talked about Longirsu yet. It is the Link 3 of the deck. It requires 2 or more effect monsters, including an Orcust. This linked card cannot be destroyed by card effects, which, you know, is a little bit redundant considering Dingirsu's here, but let's say we don't have Dingirsu. We go into Longirsu. It points to a monster by any means. and it can't be destroyed by card effects. You can also target 2 of your banished machine monsters, shuffle them into the deck, so really nice recursion. Then you can send a linked monster your opponent controls to the graveyard, so a card your opponent controls that a link monster points to, including itself, and it does have 2 upward pointing arrows, so if they summon a monster to either of the zones that this guy points to, and you have a Babel on the field, then Long Gearsuit would be a quick effect to shuffle 2 Orcust into the deck to send that card to the graveyard. And it can't attack the turn you activate the effect, so it's almost as if it's intended to be used as a quick effect. But, you know, it can be a nice little bit of removal on your own turn if you're going to use it in this deck where it won't be a quick effect. It can also be a nice little bit of recursion, shuffling 2 of your banished Orcust into the deck. In both versions of the deck, we do play Cosmic Cyclone and Forbidden Chalice. Of course, you can play whatever staples you want in your deck, it's completely up to you, it's completely your choice. However, I will say that Cosmic Cyclone is going to be the most relevant way to remove back row this format, because if you wanted to play Mystical Space Typhoon, well, you're going to be probably going against other Orcust decks, and MST doesn't work against them because Dingirsu can detach a material to basically just make MST not work. And then Forbidden Chalice is in here instead of Book of Moon. Normally when we have 3 empty slots in the deck, we just throw Book of Moon in there. We just throw in the book because we're nerds and we like to read. But here, you know, we've grown up a bit. We're playing Chalice, we like to drink a little bit, but the reason that we would play Forbidden Chalice instead of Book of Moon in this format is, you know, we might be fighting against other Orcust decks. As you can see, as you might have been able to tell so far, Orcust is a pretty good deck, and Book of Moon isn't really that good against Orcust. And in this version of the deck, if they want to Book of Moon us, that's fine, because we can still tribute it, because face down cards still recognize their conditions for tributing, so we can tribute our face down Dingirsu, resummon Dingirsu. It's as if Book of Moon was never activated in the first place. But if we use a Forbidden Chalice, it can be used against Galatea to prevent their quick effect if they happen to have a Babel. It can also be used against a Dingirsu that they resummon from the grave with a release. And of course, Forbidden Chalice, generally speaking, can also negate the most important card your opponent needs for their combo. Book of Moon acts similarly by basically making it so that they can't use their ignition effects and they can't use their monsters for Synchro Xyz or Link material. Forbidden Chalice won't prevent their cards from being used as material, however it will negate their effects. And in this format, that actually might be more relevant. It can also be used from the hand on your own turn to turn off your opponent's interruptions, like a Requiem Dragon. Of course, Book of Moon can flip that down to make sure that they can't negate you, but Forbidden Chalice can also negate them so that they can't negate you. And in this deck, there's things different about it. We are playing more Orcusts, so that we can more likely get the effect of Orchestrated Return, which is basically like a pseudo starter in this deck, as I explained before. We're of course playing the Forbidden Chalice and Cosmic Cyclone just like the other deck, but we're also playing World Legacy World 1. You can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one of your banished Orcust monsters, special summon it, but you cannot special summon for the rest of the turn except Darks. What's great about World 1 is if we for some reason have a way to get Nightmare in the grave and a Harp Horror in the grave, so we don't need to use the Nightmare to send the Harp Horror to get our play started, we could instead use the Nightmare to send a World 1, which at some point later during the game, we can banish from the grave to resummon one of our banished Orcusts, which can be really good for playing through things. So of course you're going to need to have a pretty damn good hand, but having that available really validates having those really good hands. It means that you're much more able to play through interruptions. In this extra deck, we're not playing, of course, any of the non-dark nightmares. We want to be able to go into our extra deck, summon any of our extra deck monsters. In the combo tutorial, I did summon Galatea 3 times. That's because in this particular version, that's going to happen quite a decent amount of the time. This deck is pretty grindy, and the other deck can grind with 2 Galatea because their initial play goes off with a Mermaid. But in order for us to grind, we're going to need that 3rd Galatea in this version. So if you're looking to be a little bit more budget, maybe look into the other version. We also have a Link Karibo in this version because if we happen to draw an Orcust Brass Bombard, we can turn it into a starter by normal summoning it, linking it off into a Link Karibo, then banishing it from grave to summon one of our Orcusts from the hand. Then we have 2 monsters, we can summon a Galatea, and that gets us going. We also have the Nightmare Unicorn. It is a dark monster, so of course we can use it on the follow-up play, get rid of another one of the opponent's cards by discarding a card, shuffle a card into their deck. In case this deck didn't have enough removal, that Unicorn really hammers it home that we are going to remove the opponent's cards. That field is going to be clear, and our attack points are coming right for their neck.
Open up your neck!
Another cool option you could play in the deck if you wanted was Needle Sealing. Of course, Dingirsu protecting your cards from destruction. You won't be affected by your own Needle Sealing, but the opponent will. I'm not playing it because it is a little bit win more. I'm trying to keep the deck at a tight 20 to make sure I always draw into my starters. In both versions, that is. But you could definitely play that Needle Sealing if you wanted. It's definitely a very cool idea. The last thing we're doing in both versions of the deck is we're playing Switcheroo. We don't like having the Orcust Nightmare in our hand in the Mermaid version of the deck, so if we have it there, but we also have a Cosmic Cyclone, we could also get rid of a back row, pay 1,000 life points, and activate Switcheroo to return Nightmare back to our deck to hopefully draw another card. You know, hopefully we could also use it to draw into one of our starters if we are unlucky enough not to have them, or getting a chance to draw into another copy of one of our staples is also pretty nice. That double utility of getting rid of the bricks in our hand and also helping us with our consistency makes Switcheroo such a damn good skill. The deck can be a little bit complicated, but you practice with it a couple times, re-watch the combo tutorials as well, make sure you do that, and you'll definitely get the hang of this deck soon enough. But if you're not convinced that this deck is good for some reason, I got some replays for you, so let's just get into them, shall we? We're going first here, going against Dark Magician, I believe. We have the Phantom Skyblaster to be our starter, normal summon it, summon a token, go into our Nightmare Cerberus, which allows us to go into Nightmare Mermaid, discard a card, of course the Harp Horror, because we do need that to be discarded at some point. If we didn't have it in hand, of course we would have sent it to the grave with the Orcust Nightmare. That's fine though. Anyway, gonna link these two off into the Galatea. Then before we activate that Galatea, of course, we do need to have banished monsters, so we're going to get those banished monsters off. Going to banish that Orcust Nightmare to send Brass Bombard. Of course, we're not going to use the Brass Bombard here. We normally would have sent a Harp Horror, but we still do need to banish that Orcust Nightmare so we can attach it to the Dingirsu later. Then we're going to banish that Harp Horror to summon the Symbol Skeleton. We need that for the follow-up play. Then we're going to set the Harp Horror back to the deck to set the Trap card, so we can interrupt the opponent on their turn. Then we can turn our Link monster into Dingirsu. Then we can attach the Nightmare to it, and our field is going to be protected. We also have the Negate here. So the opponent is going to be playing Dark Magician. They got the Dark Magical Circle. They get their navigation there. Then they go into their fusion, Dark Magicians, which floats upon destruction, but thankfully we don't destroy. So here, he's attacking into us. We could detach a material, protect us from destruction. However, we're still going to want to orchestrate release to get rid of that back row, right? We don't want them to use their navigation on our turn. We're going to use our release to get rid of that back row. Of course, the Orcust will be on the field again, and it won't have any materials because we did send the trap to the grave instead of putting a material back on it. But that's fine. The Symbol Skeleton is going to be able to resummon it next turn anyway. But, you know, the Dark Magicians also has the effect after a back row is activated to draw a card and set a card if it's a back row. We don't really want that to happen. We don't want them to interrupt us at all, so we're going to use that Forbidden Chalice. This seems like a really iffy play because we're basically using all of our cards basically just to stop an attack. That's what it looks like, but what we're really doing here is we're actually wiping the opponent's whole field by wiping ours first. So we're going to get rid of their back row, we're going to Chalice their Dark Magicians. They're going to attack into us and do more damage than they would have done ordinarily, but that's fine because we're going to resummon that Dingirsu on our own turn again, send their Dark Magicians. Since it's a send and not a destroy, the Dark Magicians isn't going to be able to float. Then we're going to use the Orcust Nightmare to make it bigger, send a Harp Horror. Harp Horror can also summon a monster from the deck, so we summon a Orcust Nightmare, summon any other monster. It doesn't really matter what the other monster was. Of course, we can send the Jet Synchron, who cares. Then we can go into Galatea and, you know, reshuffle that Harp Horror, get a orchestrated return, and it's going to be easy here to just attack for game. You know, you're going to have to be thinking mid-duel, so knowing how to play the deck is one thing, but also knowing how to take the best advantage of your cards is another thing. So definitely take this duel as a lesson. So I'm going second here against Phantom Knights. I can tell that it's Phantom Knights because they're playing Yuya, and you can tell that if they're playing Yuya and they don't have Pendulum Zones, they're definitely playing the Phantom Knight skill. So they set 3 back rows, so they don't have any plays, but they might potentially have a monster in hand. All they need to do is draw another monster and they have the play. We have only one Cosmic Cyclone to deal with their back row, meaning that our Cosmic Cyclone has to be lucky, right? If our Cosmic Cyclone isn't lucky, then their back row is still going to fully interrupt us. So instead, I'm going to choose to use my starter first, hopefully bait out some back row, find out what the back row is, then use Cosmic Cyclone on other things. So of course going to use the starter. Starter is going to get the Nightmare. Nightmare is going to send a Harp Horror. Harp Horror is going to summon a Brass Bombard, since I already have the Simple Skeleton in the hand. But he's going to use Book of Moon on my Brass Bombard, so I can't go into my Link 2. That's fine. I'm going to use Cosmic Cyclone to see what he has. Maybe he's scared of something else. But then I'm just going to use Switcheroo. I was hoping to draw into some, other way to draw into another way to get another monster on the field. I didn't. I just got something else. That's fine. Maybe another back row, but I just got the World Wand. It happens sometimes, but I can send my Forbidden Chalice. Forbidden Chalice can interrupt their play, and I will have a follow-up. So they're going to use Crackdown, take my only face-up monster. It happens to be level 3, so they can go into a Break Sword. They're going to target themselves and my card, and if this guy is destroyed, he gets to resummon Phantom Knights. I don't really care for him to do that, so I'm just going to negate him, and he's got no other choice but to set a card and attack into me. But here, it's my follow-up turn. Look here, they've got a Bombard, so I can summon stuff from the hand, right? I got stuff in my grave, right, to resummon with the World Wand. It's looking nice, so what do I top deck? Even better, an Orchestrated Return. Of course I'd get that. My deck was looking thinner than before, so I'm going to discard the World Wand, normal summon Scrap Recycler. That could have been any normal summon. I could have gotten the Harp Horror back some other way, but anyway, I'm going to use the World Wand, summon this, go into my Link 2, but he has another Crackdown. Unluckily for him though, I have 2 extenders in my grave. Harp Horror is going to summon a Nightmare from my deck, and Brass Bombard is going to banish itself to summon the Simple Skeleton. Then I can go into another copy of Orcust, Galatea. Then I can reset the World Wand into the deck, get a Babel on the field, activate Babel, go into Dingirsu here, fantastic, get rid of his Xyz, making sure to send that rather than destroying it so it doesn't have any floating. I'm pretty sure he didn't have enough Phantom Knights engraved to revive anyway, but just for the sake of the rule, just don't destroy guys that have floating effects, even if they can't trigger them, just for practice, right? Nightmare's effect is going to activate to make him gain, and I've already used this effect of World Wand this turn, so I can't use it again, but I could use it next turn. I destroyed my own Galatea. His field is now nothing. There's nothing you can top into, so he's going to set a card. I'm going to use Simple Skeleton, bring back the Galatea. Galatea is going to bring back the Nightmare, then set a return. Then the Harp Horror is going to summon the Nightmare from the deck. Look at all this stuff I can do on my opponent's turn. The fact that Babel gives us this much follow-up play is why I like it so much. Look at how much card advantage we have accrued. We were on the back end just a couple of turns ago, and now look at us. They got nothing, and we have everything. We have 5 cards left in deck. You know how bonkers that is? Anyway, Automaton is going to banish. It's going to get banished cards back into the deck. I'm going to go into another Galatea. Going to use Nightmare to send a Simple Skeleton. Simple Skeleton is going to revive with the Dingirsu, send the last remaining monster, and go in for game. That's how both versions of the Orcust decks work. They're both a lot of fun. They're both super competitive, and you can play whichever version you want until inevitably one of them gets banned, which I'm sure it will. But yeah, if you guys have any more questions about Orcust, decisions you can make, if I somehow forgot something in this video, be sure to leave questions in the comments below and I'll talk to you about them. But yeah, let me know how you guys feel about Orcust. Like the video if you like the video, subscribe if you're new around here, and hit that bell. Also remember to follow Weatherman's new Twitter account to get updates about Team 6K. And yeah, I've been Undead from Team 6K, signing out.
Wait, hey, I feel like the greatest. Now I feel like they hate it. Now I feel like the only one and there is no debating. Man, I feel like they leaving. Now I feel like they waited. Now I feel like this is the feeling before I can make it. Before I hit the stage, I just feel like I'm nauseous. Or I feel like I'm popping. Or I feel like a boss is. Maybe I'm feeling off it. Or I feel like I'm toxic. Maybe feeling intoxicated is the reason for all this. I wanna whip it with the top down, dog, like I'm Earth Gang. Told him, listen, while they shine like my first name. Told me go and grab a titty, boy, it's my first chain. I ain't even switch gears yet, it's the first lane. The first pain I ever felt was the worst pain. Then church came, and that feeling of hurt came. Then her name made this feeling all worth pain. She made me realize what I had felt in the first place.